colleagues, and welcome to this monumental event at the beginning of the year. My name is Kabelo Moja, and I am a board member as part of the South African Venture Capital Association. It gives me pleasure to host the event this evening, and I look forward to, at some point, gathering in person to have more of these forums. We are joined in a discussion with the Black Management Forum. Today's discussion is centered around the role of empowerment, notably the BBBEE, in creating economic value within our economy. As we all know, the Black Management Forum has a varied mandate, which includes the development of leadership, the creation of managerial structures that are principally reflective of the demographics and values of our country. SAVCA itself is an industry body, an association that advocates and promotes private equity and venture capital on behalf of its members as an industry. The importance of today's discussion and the partnership between the BMF and SAVCA cannot be overstated. I think we are all well aware that transformation and empowerment remains an issue of debate, as it has for many decades. BBBEE is clearly not a tick box event. We need to create and enhance real, tangible empowerment within our economy and the broader country as a whole. We are aware that broad-based empowerment also creates a collective communal growth, and that is ultimately what it is that we want to achieve. What is positive about private equity is that it is very hands-on as an asset class and adopts actual action plans as part of its investment thesis in order to change or enhance governance, create jobs, contribute to enterprise and supplier development, failing which one is able to impose penalties for non-compliance. So as an asset class, it's very hands-on and active, and I think can contribute quite significantly within the financial services industry. BMF and SAVCA have similar mandates, and that is ultimately to create an inclusive financial services industry. Today's discussion and agenda will focus on a panel discussion, followed by a Q&A session. In terms of protocol, please raise questions on the online messaging service should you have any questions during the session. I think a lot of us are familiar with what private equity is, but very briefly, it is an alternative asset class that adopts an active investment strategy. It's typically illiquid in nature and persists over a 10-year plus term. From an economic perspective, the idea with private equity is you make equity investments into businesses, you grow them over that period of time, and at the end, once you dispose of your interest, you return third-party capital back to investors, together with a return, otherwise known as a hurdle. And anything in excess of that hurdle is what is shared, generally on an 80-20 basis. 80% goes back, was returned to investors, and 20% is retained by the manager. Generally speaking, private equity has outperformed the capital markets. And as we know, the capital markets are generally dependent on external circumstances, performance of the financial markets. Many of us are also familiar with Regulation 28, which has also created a specific private equity allocation for pension funds and has delinked private equity from other alternative investments and included a specific threshold. So pension funds are now able to deploy far more capital into private equity as a standalone asset class, and that contributes to diversification and the broader empowerment discussion. Without further ado, I would like to introduce our commissioner, our BBBEE commissioner, Mrs. Zodwa Ntuli. She is also the Deputy Director General at the Department of Trade and Industry. She will be sharing some thoughts. In her role as Deputy Director General, she was responsible for consumer and corporate regulation, and she has also spent some time at the Competition Commission previously as a divisional manager. She's got an extensive resume, having spent time at South African Airways, and is also a board member of the National Lotteries Board. Ntuli, without further ado, I'm going to hand over to you and ask us to perhaps just set the scene in terms of the current landscape.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you very much for the introductions. And I'm happy to be here today just to engage with the subject of today. I hope that at the end of the session today, we will learn from each other in terms of what is happening, but also particularly in terms of how we're doing as a country, and so that we can really pace ourselves to see whether by 2030 we'll achieve some of the goals that have been set in the NDP for South Africa. So on an annual basis, when we look at BBBEE and economic transformation in general, we actually measure how we're doing against those. And the last time when we measured, we're not doing very well. So I hope that these kinds of sessions will actually help to stimulate some kind of urgency around the need to transform the economy of South Africa. I have been requested just to give you the context, basically the journey of BBBEE. I'm not going to be too detailed around it, but just to give the background. And then in doing that, I'll also just give you the context of the current status as per our own statistics that we prepare on an annual basis. And then the second thing that I'll also touch on is the role of the Commission itself as a regulatory body. Why it was set up and what is it that we're doing in terms of our mandate. And then the last thing that I've been requested to do is to just highlight what the focus areas for the Commission would be in 2022 and to 2023. So that is the sequence of how I will deal with these issues. I'm going to request, though, your permission to switch off my video so that I can be able to follow my slides on my screen. And I will then come back once I've done the presentation to be in a position to engage and interact better. So in terms of just the background, I think everybody is aware in terms of what the origin of the BBBEE legislation is. But I think what is important to mention is that this is a constitutional imperative. The BBBEE legislation emanates directly from the Constitution of South Africa in terms of the right to equality, which is embedded in Clause 9 of the Constitution. So particularly, what we are seeking to achieve is some level of parity between Black people and the previously advantaged people that had the economy before. So Black people in terms and within the context of BBBEE, we refer to Africans, Indians, and colored people. And in terms of some of the confusion that sometimes occurs around the Chinese nationals, there are Chinese people in South Africa that had been here and that were citizens before 1994. And that population of Chinese people were classified in South Africa as colored people. So to the extent that they were classified as colored people, they did approach the courts in 2007, 2008 to seek recognition under the BBBEE Act and the employment equity legislation. And that particular court case, obviously, they were granted the court order for recognition to the extent that they were classified as colored. So sometimes people do confuse that any Chinese national that is in South Africa qualifies for recognition under the BBBEE Act. It is not the case. So the legislation was passed then in 2003, and it evolved in a sense that there were obviously interventions that happened since 2003, where we had in 2007, the codes of good practice, which were issued for the first time. So from 2003 to 2007, literally there was no specific guidance in terms of what to measure, how to measure it, and really how to identify even the areas of improvement. So the introduction of the codes in 2007 did provide some guidance, and we've seen that also birthing the professional around verification, and we also have a significant number of consultants and advisors in this space. So the BBBEE legislation did bring about some developments in terms of creating new professions, but also enhancing the existing professions around advisory services and so forth. So it has been a positive piece of legislation in a sense that it actually broadened the participation of a number of professionals in a sense that some could then start specializing in BBBEE advisory services and consulting services. But I think key to this really is the birthing of the verification professionals themselves. Verification is really a unique way of measuring and confirming and basically giving independent confirmation of the claims that are made by companies from time to time when they get to be measured. And within the BBBEE legislation, we use the annual measurement. So it is important that the verification professionals maintain their independence and that they're able to gather the evidence or at least test the claims against the evidence that is provided. So that kind of profession is really critical in making sure that BBBEE is implemented appropriately and that the claims that are being made in terms of progress can really be justified and linked to the actual impact on the ground. So I think from 2007 also, if you look at it, there has been developments, and in 2011, the Department of Trade, Industry and Competition at the time decided to review the legislation, and in that review, they identified gaps that required some amendments to the legislation to close some of those gaps. In 2013, then, the amendments were done and enacted in the Amendment Act, and those amendments then gave also birth to the creation of the BBBEE Commission, which is a regulatory entity that is tasked with overseeing the implementation of BBBEE in the interest of the public. And there are a number of functions that we have. I'll just touch on them during the presentation, and just to highlight the most important, the most prevalent ones, and the ones that really make us to interact more with the stakeholders like yourselves. So now in 2013, those amendments were done. And then in 2015, then the codes of good practice were also amended to align to some of the changes and also to improve some of the areas around measurement. There were other changes that were done in 2015, December, which sought to introduce some improvements around the skills development, the enterprise development, but also in terms of the treatment of joint ventures, as well as also introducing the recognition of the YES program to award benefits to those participating entities. So now, if we look at 2003 to date, I think most of us will appreciate that there has been a lot of economic activity that was stimulated by BBBEE. I think what is important is really to measure whether all of those activities were really towards achieving what were the objectives of the Act. And if not, what were the gaps and how can we close those gaps going forward? Because at the end of the day, the intention is to ensure that the objectives for which this legislation was enacted is going to be achieved. And key to that really is looking at the South African economy and looking at the ownership patterns of the South African economy, with the majority of South Africans sitting outside the economy really, in the peripheries. So if you look at the statistics, the Stats SA estimates around the population, Black people comprise about 92% of the population in South Africa, with white people standing at around 7.9%. So if you look at the economically active population as well, you'll see that Black people account for about 91.3%. And these are the figures as at 2019. I did not check the updates, but there aren't any significant moves around these figures. White people, in terms of the EAP, account for about 8.7% of the population. So what is important, though, is for us to then measure in terms of the economic wealth of this country, in terms of ownership of the productive assets of this country, to track whether we will, in the near future, be in a position to achieve the level of parity that is required. I think we have seen also the reports by the World Bank, which classified South Africa as the most unequal society in the world. And that should actually worry us, because if we continue to be as unequal as we are, then we can forget about basically dealing with the triple challenges that South Africa has in terms of poverty, inequality, as well as unemployment. We do need to find some level of parity, equality, so that we can be able to together grow the economy and give Black people confidence that they are a meaningful part of the economy of South Africa and that they should participate in the mainstream economy. So over the years, BBBEE has taken place. A number of big deals were initiated and implemented. And if we measure some of them, I know that Duma Kabelo last year released a paper which was basically looking at some of the major BEE transactions that took place over the period, and to also try and look at what actually worked at the time and what did not work, what can be improved of. And critically in that assessment was the issue around funding. Most of the deals were structured around the lack of funding, and as a result, they had a lot of encumbrances, a lot of restrictions around the participation of Black people, but also around the economic interest flow in the hands of Black people. That is why some of the deals that we see today that were initiated very early in the BBBEE arena, they did not produce the Black people that are actually owning a part of the economy. But they have, to a certain extent, advanced the financial benefit towards some of the Black people. But what has not been transferred in real terms is the value in the hands of Black people, to an extent where Black people can say, we now own a portion of the economy in South Africa. So now, as the BBBEE Commission, one of the functions that we have been given is to monitor this progress on a regular basis. So we do produce what we call the National Status and Trends on BEE, on BBBEE report, which basically is based on the compliance reports that are submitted to us by the JSE listed companies, as well as the organs of state and public entities. So when we do receive these reports, then we start measuring the progress in terms of how the entities are doing, and also how collectively we are moving towards achieving the targets. So if we look at the latest report that we had, which was the 2020, dating back from 2017, in 2016, we did a benchmark study. And then in 2017, that's when we started receiving the compliance reports for us to measure. So we then track it from 2017 into 2020. I think what is important really to mention within the context is that in 2017, we were sitting at about 27% of ownership, Black ownership in South Africa. And in 2020, that slightly increased to 31%. And in that, we then had Black women ownership increasing from 9% in 2017 to about 15% in 2020. And obviously, we're hoping that that increase, even if it's slight, but it's a real increase in a sense that it will actually translate into value at the end of the day. What is of concern, however, in the JSE listed companies that reported for that period in 2020, we could not identify a single entity that is 100% Black owned. So previously in 2019, we were at 3.3% in terms of 100% Black owned entities on the JSE. But in 2020, there was no single entity that could be identified in the reports that we received. So it is possible that the Black entities had not reported for some reason, A number of entities did not report because some were affected by COVID-19 and most of their operations were affected and their compliance also got to be affected. So we were also advised that there are some Black owned entities, 100% Black owned entities that actually delisted. We will follow on that and just to see which ones are those and what the impact is in terms of Black ownership on the JSE. And so if we also look at the management control, which is also a critical part in terms of the control of the economy, and that is involving really making decisions and making the influence in terms of the enterprises in South Africa. We found that the JSE listed companies in terms of Black management control was sitting at only 28%, while the public sector was sitting at 65%, 65.8% Black management control. So what this tells us that to date, the private sector has not been moving as fast as it should in terms of Black management control. And so at times when we then monitor the movement around Black ownership, when there's an increase on Black ownership, we also expect the increase in management control, in Black management control, so that it corresponds, so that the ownership structure should be reflected also in the management of the company. It wouldn't make sense where you've got a company that purports to be 51% Black owned, but when you go into their management, you find that their management is untransformed completely. That would not necessarily have a proper balance and will actually give us an indicator that this might be a fronting scheme that purports to be an empowerment scheme or a Black ownership scheme. So now if we then, because there are 5 elements, key elements that are being measured under BBBEE. If you look, I've touched on just the progress on ownership as well as management control, but there's also skills development, there's enterprise and supply development, as well as socioeconomic development. What we've seen with the 2020 statistics was that there has been an increase and a serious increase basically in terms of contribution towards skills development. It has increased to about 60% of the targets, and in 2017 it was around 37%. So this is notable, and it's something that we believe would go a long way to contribute meaningfully to the economic recovery, especially as a number of enterprises and Black entrepreneurs have suffered during this period. And if we look at just basically in terms of what was contributed based on the reports that we received for 2020, for skills development, the JSE listed companies that reported collectively contributed about 11.2 billion towards skills development, while the public entities contributed about 1.8 billion in terms of skills development. But what we've also noted is that increase around enterprise development, which has moved from 44% to 61%, as well as the socioeconomic development, which is at 90% from 88%. So these are the positive signs that, you know, we might not be happy about the pace of BBBEE, but I think what we cannot ignore is that there are certain initiatives that are moving, and all that is left really for us is to encourage the acceleration in terms of these initiatives so that we can achieve the desired goals in the legislation. And just to also indicate that there is a potential when we look at what has been happening over the years. I've already alluded to some of the challenges, the lack of funding for acquisitions or even creation of new enterprises that are owned by Black people has been a significant challenge. That is in addition to other issues like market access, as well as issues around the value chain, basically penetrating the value chains. It has been a challenge for Black businesses, and it continues to be a challenge. So when we look at what has been happening, we still realize that you know, BBBEE as a policy has got a potential to change the ownership patterns in South Africa. However, it is important that we increase the opportunities and the funding to enable Black people to make acquisitions, to create new Black-owned businesses, but also to ensure that those Black businesses that already exist can actually grow, and we can create conglomerates that can be Black owned in South Africa, which is something that is foreign at the moment. So yes, there is a potential to do that. There has been hiccups in terms of how it has been implemented. It has not always been, it has not always produced good results. So now talking about ownership, as the Commission, we also receive major BBBEE transactions that are registered with us. And once they are registered with us, then we assess them in terms of the merits to determine if these are real BBBEE ownership transactions. So in terms of just the 2 years that we assessed, because the next report is going to come out at the end of the financial year, the end of March, between March and June in this calendar year, that will cover 2 financial years. But the one report that we have is in relation, the 2 reports that we have is in relation to 2017 to 2018 financial years. Here we had actually about 95 transactions in 2019, and we had 272 transactions in 2017. So in terms of these transactions, what we've noted is that a number of these transactions were initiated, obviously, by the private sector entities. And what is also positive about that is that they've also contributed to the financing of these particular transactions to empower Black people. So what we picked up is that about 30% of the finances that were contributed were through vendor financing, which is coming from the private sector entities. And about 18% was coming from the banks, with only 2.8% funded by government funding institutions. So there is obviously room to improve around the funding mix that can be made available to Black people to acquire stakes, but also to grow, to create and grow their own enterprises. The one thing, though, that is of concern in terms of the analysis that we did on the transactions, in the first year, we had an indication of new entrants that were coming in terms of these transactions. But when we then look at this, the second year, we find that the new entrants are reducing. And we pick up that trend also in the third year and the fourth year. So what that can be indicating is that we've got a few players that have got funding available for them to enter into these deals. And that in itself basically means that we've got just the same people that are being empowered within the economic space. But the lack of funding, again, is the source of that, because those people that have funding are likely to be in a position to have the necessary leverage to get more funding. So it is important that when we look at these transactions, we just look at what are the challenges and how can we unlock that. And I think that is where your profession as well comes into the picture, because you're looking at venture capitals for creation of new business and the growth of new businesses, but also to look at private equity funds that have continuously played a role in growing the economy. So in terms of the challenge that we then picked up as well in terms of these ownership transactions is that some of them do not comply, in a sense that the provisions that they have circumvent what is intended in terms of the BBBEE legislation. And those that do not comply, they are given an opportunity to fix and remedy the transaction, and failing which, obviously, the transaction would not be recognized from the side of the regulator, and it would not be compliant and may be referred for an investigation. So in terms of just the status, really, I must summarize to say that we are not doing very well, but also in terms of the compliance by our private sector and our public sector, it has not been exemplary. So we're hoping that with the continued education and awareness and the assistance around advisory services, we can begin to see an improvement in terms of reporting on an annual basis by the JSE listed companies and the public entities. But also what we have picked up is that there is a slight increase, though, in the companies that are at BBBEE level 1 to 4. And we have now at least less companies that are BBBEE non-compliant. This is a good sign. It does basically, on our side as the regulator, tells us that we are beginning to see entities really willing to contribute to transformation in this country. And that is going to be encouraged also by the consequences for entities that do not comply. And hopefully those consequences can really assist in developing our economy to benefit everybody in South Africa. I've already given you the summary of how we're looking like based on our national status. And having said that, there are a number of issues that continue to fuel the narrative that BBBEE basically amounts to fronting, basically amounts to corruption and so forth. We would like to dispel that. And we would like to dispel that because it is not true. Corruption is corruption. When it happens, it must be dealt with. And there are a number of issues. We cannot say the tendering system is corruption. The tendering system is intended to open access to Black entrepreneurs and previously disadvantaged people to access some opportunities, economic opportunities. And if they're going to be clouded with corruption, that actually just undermines the ability of Black people to be able to run things by themselves because of the fear that those things will be regarded as corrupt or as evil. But at the end of the day, if you look at it, without the BBBEE legislation, without the affirmative action regulations that were introduced in this country, we would not be seeing the kind of progress that we have. It might be insignificant for now if you look at the bigger picture, but without this, the implementation of this legislation, it would not have occurred. I think it is important for us to now say, what is it that is not working? How can we improve on that? Instead of creating the narrative that actually seeks to discourage the empowerment of Black people. We need to pick up the things that are not working. We need to pick up the circumventions. We need to pick up rent seeking that is unacceptable and deal with those, but make sure that we encourage the activities around BBBEE and not paint BBBEE with that brush. So now this brings me now to the role of the BBBEE Commission. Having said that, from 2003, there wasn't a regulator that would monitor and oversee if the BBBEE legislation is being implemented, and if implemented is implemented proper, and that we can be able to have evidence that all of this is happening. So the BBBEE as a regulatory body was established to do exactly that. But over and above the functions that it has, is also to look at receiving complaints and also investigating complaints on its own accord, or initiate investigation on its own accord if it detects some of the unbecoming practices in the market. So this is one area that was not there before. Previously, companies would and Black entrepreneurs will complain about fronting, which has been prevalent since 2003 and has continued unabated for a very long time, and ended up becoming entrenched in a sense that we found that a lot of models were just being created just to circumvent. So the commission was established to also investigate those types of cases and be in a position to make pronouncements around them. But the other critical part that was introduced was really to bring in transparency in the BBBEE ownership transactions, to know who is behind these transactions. And a threshold was created of 25 million in transaction value and above, to say that every transaction that is at that value must be reported to the BBBEE Commission for them to register it, so that everybody who seeks to know who's behind this transaction can get that information. But over and above that, it also sought to make sure that if there are any fronting practices in the deal that is being initiated, they can be picked up earlier and be prevented, so that we do not end up with transactions that are just a fronting scheme. And the third mandate that we have, which is also critical, I've already touched on it, is the receiving of compliance reports, which we are required to analyze on an annual basis. I've already given you a summary of the results of our annual reports. And so this area is actually assisting us to look at the entire country through the JSE listed companies and the public entities, and to start reflecting whether we are going somewhere as a country. So that basically summarizes the role of the commission and why it was established. And one of the key things that is important is the turnaround times that the commission in executing its mandate is supposed to be adhering to. When we deal with complaints, we are required in terms of the Act to attend to each and every complaint within the period of 12 months. So I must indicate that because of the workload that we've had, we've not been able to meet the 12 months period in respect of all of the investigations. Some we do, in some that are complex, we have not been able to do. But I think what is important to note is that of the 909 investigations that we have conducted, we have resolved 76% of those matters, with about the remaining being under investigation. So we believe that if we enhance our capacity, this will even improve our turnaround times more. But particularly for people that are on this webinar, I think it is important to also note the service that we provide, which is free, of advisory opinions. In this way, you can give us a transaction, give us the set of facts, and if you can, give us the documents like shareholders agreements and all of the agreements that relate to it, for us to give a view on it, to tell you if it's compliant before you implement it. This we do, and we provide our advisory opinions within 30 days. Most of the advisory opinions are issued within 2 weeks, although our turnaround time is 30 days. And then with the registration of BBBEE transactions, those ownership deals that I spoke about, when we receive them, we are required to issue you with a certificate of registration within 10 days. And then after 90 days after that, we're supposed to assess the transaction and tell you if we've got a problem with it. And so you can expect to get that feedback within 90 days. We are meeting these turnaround times. And in terms of compliance reports as well, once we've received the annual compliance report of an entity, within 90 days, we must assess it and give the entity feedback in terms of its compliance. And then the last service that we provide, which is not in the regulations, but we introduced it to enhance the level of advice that we can give to our stakeholders, and those are written clarifications. So written clarifications are basically something that is short of being an advisory opinion. This is basically general queries that have got to do with the interpretation as well as the application of any specific part of the codes or the act. And then we can just give you clarification. We do that within 5 days. And most of them we issue within 3 days. So we also have a strategy. Our strategy looks at compliance to encourage entities to comply voluntarily, but then also we've got what we call the corrective enforcement strategy. So once we have attempted to assist you to comply, and then you do not comply and you fall into non-compliance, then that's where we invoke the corrective enforcement strategy. Even if it's the enforcement strategy, we still give the opportunity for you to correct it and fix it, failing which then only then will then send it for prosecution or further referrals in other regulatory entities. So the last thing that I should then say, having given you the context and also having given you the role and the mandate of the commission, I think over the period since 2016 when we started operating, we have obviously seen a lot of improvement in the level of compliance around the private entities as well as the public sector. We are still, though, concerned about the level of reporting, both from the private sector and the public sector. So in terms of the focus areas going forward, we're looking at just ensuring that we continue to build the capacity of the BBBEE Commission to improve the efficiencies and the effectiveness of the organization. I think it has become increasingly, visible that you do need a regulator to be able to advance BBBEE and make sure that we achieve what we ought to achieve. And we also will be focusing on expediting the finalization of all of our investigations within a period of 1 year. And this particularly, we want to do it because a lot of complainants, when they come to the commission, it's when they have already been exhausted, legally, financially, they do not have any more strength to fight. And so the longer we keep some of the cases, I think the more anxiety they have and the more, I think, concerns that they have when the matters are not being finalized in time. So we will focus on improving the turnaround times around that. And in doing that, we've actually appointed a panel of external investigators to enhance the capacity that we already have in-house and to make sure that some of the cases can be investigated externally and so that we can finalize many, many cases in a short period of time. We also will be focusing on identifying priority and systemic concerns that, that we have been observing in various markets. And on those concerns, we'll be holding public hearings that will then begin to bring the spotlight to these matters so that we can have a systematic intervention to address them. One example of this kind of concerns that we've been observing over the period is the owner-driver schemes that are implemented in South Africa, the number of concerns about them. But it is not up to us to say that the schemes are not okay until we have done a proper process to assess and make sure that the schemes can actually be compliant at all times. And in addition to that, there's also a number of broad-based schemes that when you look at them, they do not comply. There are a number of schemes that are complying and they do follow the codes, but there are some that do not comply. So this is becoming, you would have noticed that we did an investigation around the employee scheme that was run by G4S Security. Basically there, we found a whole lot of things that are so glaringly non-compliant, but the scheme was continuing from 2006 even to date when the commission was investigating. So it is important that we look at some of the systemic issues and be able to address them not on a case-by-case basis, but on a wider intervention. The other focus area is really to continue the visibility of the commission through the education and awareness. We believe that there's still room for us to continue providing advice and guidance to our stakeholders to improve compliance. I think as a regulatory body, our role is to rather achieve compliance as opposed to wait for people to contravene and start chasing people. I don't think that's the reason that we have been established. And to the extent possible, we would like to work with all of our stakeholders to make sure that we can achieve the objectives of the Act. And in conclusion, I just want to also say that our focus this year will be to implement our enforcement strategy. We have given enterprises an opportunity since 2016 to correct behavior, to correct their schemes, and also we've given guidance in terms of what to correct. So in this year, starting from this 2021 to 2022, we have invoked the enforcement strategy. We are referring a lot of entities now for non-compliance, and we hope to prosecute a few. And we are also pursuing now the cancellation of contracts, licenses, and any other authorization, whether it's a permit that has been obtained from any organs of state for those entities that have been found to be in violation. So this is basically my presentation in terms of what I was requested to address you on. And obviously I'll be available for any further engagements. And hopefully this has been of assistance to you. But just in conclusion, BBBEE is important. And I think we will obviously in this session, perhaps look at the value it will also add to your profession, because that's the purpose, you know, to really economically empower Black people in South Africa. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Commissioner. Very insightful insights, and you know, certainly lots to contemplate. I think we could listen to you for quite a while in terms of the insights and the sort of cases that you're seeing. It's encouraging to see that you're also open to advisory opinions and engaging and working pre-transaction. I'm just mindful of the time. One thing I wanted to just get clarity with you, Commissioner. I see that there have been some questions around just getting access to your slides. We were not able to see your slides on the screen. Can I ask you to consider allowing us to share them with the broader audience if there is a need? Are you comfortable with that?
I am comfortable with that. There are no disclaimers. The slides are open.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you. So I guess let's moving on. We've got quite a well-seasoned panel. I'm going to hand over to Mr. Monde Ndlovu. He is the head of advocacy and thought leadership at the Black Management Forum. He is a speaker, writer, and transformational leader, passionate about economic transformation, leadership and human capital development. His skill set lies in strategy and execution with a strong business advisory and project management background. He enjoys or has an MBA, as well as a Bachelor of Business Administration. Just being mindful of time, Ndlovu, can I hand over to you and ask you to please introduce your panel?
Thank you very much, Mr. Moja, our host. I don't have that MBA just yet. I'm at the end of it. So I just want to correct that in case there are spies here who know that it's not over just yet. But yeah, it's almost done, or it's almost done. Thank you to SAVCA. Thank you to the panelists who are here. Special greetings to our colleagues on the line. Thank you to the Commissioner for her outstanding input and raising some pertinent key issues. And on the panel, I just want to quickly introduce Mr. Langa Madonko, co-founder and investment principal at Summit Africa. Welcome, my brother. We also have Stuart Theobald, chairman of Intellidex, which is a research house. Welcome, Stuart. We also have Mametja Moshe, CEO and founder of Moshe Capital. Welcome, my sister. And of course, we had the commissioner. We are mindful of time, so I would like us to try and be as brief as possible with our responses, so that SAVCA tomorrow can give us their platform again and not complain. I think the first thing for me on our side is that given what the commissioner has said very broadly, 2 minutes per speaker, just to reflect briefly on the most pertinent issue that has come out from her input with regard to BBBEE in the space that you play in. So we'll start with my brother Langa. Just your quick reflections on that.
Thank you very much, and good evening to everyone. I think for me the key takeaway is the clear distinction that the commissioner has made between some form of financial return versus the accumulation of value and within those particular entities. I think we have seen some successful BBBEE transactions where entities have reported that they've derived stellar financial returns, but we're not necessarily seeing the extent of transformation reaching the levels where we thought it would be now from a value perspective for the underlying investors.
Thank you, my brother. Dr. Stuart, your brief reflections and your most pertinent point coming out of the commissioner's input.
Yeah, thanks, Monde. I guess what strikes me as a researcher is just how difficult it is to find reliable numbers, and then to be confident that what we're measuring is reflecting the right thing. You know, as the commissioner put it, the objective of BBBEE is to remove the racial distortions in the economy. But we actually don't measure the extent to which those distortions have been removed. So it's primarily a question of the distribution of wealth in the economy. But beyond measuring things like ownership of JSE companies, which is just one little part of what could be assets in an economy, we don't systematically assess how assets are distributed across the economy. And so we don't really know when we're making progress over the long run. So I think, and maybe we can talk about it more in discussion, I think there are measurement problems. Conceptually, how do we find indicators that tell us what we want to know? You know, how we talk a lot about JSE company ownership, but really there are lots of conceptual issues about what we mean by ownership when it comes to the JSE, what we mean by Black people being owners of what's really about a legal entity, which is not a natural person, and so on. So I think, you know, that comes through to me, and I think the Commission has worked valiantly to collect better data, but I think it's an ongoing task that we need to focus on and build our insights and the science around BBBEE.
Thank you very much, Dr. Stuart. Mametja.
Thank you, Monde, and thank you to SAVCA and BMF for this platform. And Commissioner, it was really good to listen to your speech, and it felt like walking down memory lane. So my key takeaway, the first one was how far we've come. You know, And when BEE came in, it was all about ownership and management. But over time, we realized that it's not only that. It's important to create new businesses and new entrepreneurs through enterprise development, supplier development, and through procurement. So on the one end, yes, it's important to talk about ownership, but let's create new businesses and grow the pie, so to speak. And I guess this is why we're here on how do we then link BEE to value creation and to growing the economy. When I reflect, the 2000s were all about ownership and management, as I mentioned. But I'm more encouraged that now when you look at companies, you look at all the elements and not just focus on the one. And the inclusiveness of it, I think Stuart also alluded to that, around having more broad-based structures. And then lastly, the commissioner touched on something that is also critical when I look, especially, we work a lot in the mining industry, and when I looked at transactions that happened around that 2005 at high PGM and gold prices, and funding structures that were so cumbersome to put together, but eventually most of those structures did not even result in value creation for the individuals or the stakeholders and the shareholders that came in as BEE shareholders. So yeah, that's it for now.
Thank you very much, Mametja. So firstly, just to go back on the issue of value creation, I think the first question would be, is transformation and economic value mutually exclusive, and economic inclusion? Because there are clear debates raging out there in the market around the separation of transformation and its tools from economic tools. And there is no deliberate linkage. The BMF does make that linkage, others try and make that linkage, but the overriding narrative out there is as if transformation and economic growth are mutually exclusive. So Dr. Stuart, I'll start with you on that one. Can you give us a picture in terms of the research that you have done? What has come out of the linking of the two, or trying to link the two?
It's an interesting debate, but it was a debate that was probably discussed much more back in the 1990s, in the sort of first phase of thinking about transformation, when the question was, do we achieve transformation through growth? So it's less redistribution, it's about growing the economy to include Black people. Or is transformation achieved by really shifting around assets as they stand? And I think that it's interesting to see different perspectives on this debate, and we deal a lot with foreign investors. And when you try and explain to a foreign investor in Europe or anywhere in the world, what BEE is, they go, oh, wait, this is a tax. I get it. We've got to pay a tax. We're used to that in lots of countries. We've got to localize it. So there's some cost we factor into our model that says BEE. And we try and say, no, this is not a tax. This is an opportunity where you allocate some of your resources to correcting an injustice and enable the economy and your business to grow within that context. And that kind of perception balance really swings about whether people are seeing BEE as tied into economic opportunity, or really whether they see it as a kind of burden. I think that there is certainly economic opportunity. There's a transformation dividend that flows to companies who achieve transformation, and that dividend has to be the natural driver. And I think the Commission does very important work in overseeing and interrogating what's happening in the economy. And we certainly need to remove the fronting and fraud that allows some companies to attempt to present themselves as transformed. But when we have genuine transformation happening, it must happen because there is a positive incentive for companies to do so. That when they transform, they improve their sustainability. They're recognized as being more integrated into South Africa, as more aligned to South Africa's national public policy objectives. And that means that they have more sustainable and ultimately more profitable businesses. As long as people recognize that transformation plays that function, then there is a positive relationship between economic growth and BEE. It's not, as some of foreign investors see it, merely a tax that just has to be paid to do business in South Africa. It's something that's enabling economic activity. And sometimes the policy doesn't quite align with that. And I think we can talk about what elements within overall BEE approaches are positive economic elements and what might be a drag and constrain businesses from growing. And that, I think, is a complex debate. But certainly there is a way that BEE is positive for economic growth.
Thank you, Dr. Stuart. Mametja, on which side of the debate are you on this issue?
I certainly think that in recent times, when it comes to looking at BEE, we are getting aligned to the rest. The rest of the world is catching up with us because, when you look at ESG and social impact, it speaks to, broadening who owns the economy, and BEE certainly addresses that. But I think, to Stuart's point, there is an element of how do you actually look at this? Is it an opportunity or is it actually a drag? And when I look at, companies that have succeeded in this, is where they look at it as an opportunity. If you are a company and you need suppliers, and because there aren't any suppliers in your neighboring, areas, you have to bring it in from far, far away, you're probably better off providing someone who is a local with capital to start that same product locally. So these are some of the opportunities that that I think the companies and need to start looking at and thinking about it that way. Have we grown in BEE? Have we, had the economic, the value creation? I think to some extent, value creation was still left in a few hands. But what we're doing now is actually trying to change that through procurement, through supply development, through enterprise development. And I think also in private equity provides a great opportunity actually, because you have well knowledgeable Black private equity fund managers, but then also help you in corporatizing, growing your business, taking yourself global, bringing best practice. So I think BEE is an opportunity, and we just need to always be mindful and make sure that we apply it right. And I liked what the commissioner said. We always need to check these things. It mustn't be fronting. It must be real transactions that have real impact in the economy.
Thank you, Mametja. And Langa, finally, your views on this matter.
I think I echo the same sentiment as Stuart and Mametja, that it's about how you perceive it, why you do it, and ultimately how you do it. I think done with the right motives and understanding that doing good also tends to yield positive business outcomes. Broad-based Black economic empowerment serves, amongst other things, from a business perspective, to increase the consumer base for the products that are being consumed by business, because you have a greater access to capital in a broader proportion of the population. It also serves to create a system where you address the issues of inequality, which creates greater levels of sustainability and certainty within the economy. I think one of the things that we are known for globally by international investors is that in South Africa, we have what many people have termed strike season, where because of the disparity between the earning potential between the haves and the have-nots, between white collar and blue collar, we are always having a situation whereby we're having continuous strikes to address the pay disparities. And in a system where we are driving broad-based economic empowerment, Black economic empowerment beyond just the aspects of ownership, to where it's about management control, it's about exercising and realizing real economic returns, then that will start to help to address some of those issues. And then lastly, I think also one of the critical aspects why this is important is also to deal with the issues that that permeate from our history. I think on the journey to reconciliation, there must be some form of repatriation and some form of leveling the playing field in terms of making sure that some of the injustices that were perpetrated during apartheid are addressed in the current term. And some of that speaks to those, shall I call it, economic segregation. And this is part of that journey of trying to offset that historic trend.
Thank you, thank you, Langa, for that. I think on the next point, I think I should keep you on here because you've done some work on Regulation 28. And I think putting a lens on BBBEE in that space, what exactly are the opportunities in terms of the new regulations there, and what can we learn from that?
I think Regulation 28 presents, rather the draft amendment present an exceptional opportunity to drive investment into the unlisted sector. And one of the benefits of that is that private equity in the main has been one of the main catalysts for championing the financing around BEE transactions. I think many of the original proponents of the BEE investments would have used similar structures in terms of being able to enable them to finance their positions into that. And I think it does present a wider berth of opportunities for aggregating the capital that is required by expanding the amount of investment that retirement funds can make into Black-owned private equity funds, amongst others, where they select to use transformation as a lever that they seek to determine who they are investing with. I think also one of the things that will come from the amendments from Regulation 28 is with the focus on the drive of investing in infrastructure. Infrastructure itself tends to be an enabler for economic growth. And we hope that this economic growth will create new nodes of opportunities. And as Mametja said, and I want to echo that same sentiment, I think those, we have looked at broad-based Black economic empowerment around the issues of ownership. But there is a role that has to be played that is looking at creation of new spaces and new sectors. How are we enabling through this amendment to Regulation 28 for new spaces and new entrants to participate in new parts of the economy, in breaking down monopolies and oligarchies that exist in some segments of the economy? Will this infrastructure spend catalyze the creation of new players within defined spaces? Just to give an example before I finish off, for example, if you look at the JSE and you look at the healthcare space, you're looking at 4 players at best who are in that space. Is there an opportunity, considering that there's a shortage in terms of the healthcare facilities that are present in the country, that this additional spend focusing on infrastructure will drive into those segments? Will the Mametjas of the world, will the Kabelos of the world invest in that space, creating new players and taking advantage of the new opportunities there?
Thank you. Thanks, Langa. Mametja, do you want to add on to that?
I actually think Langa summed it up nicely. You know, for me, one of the key things, and I think as we think, are we there yet? Where are we taking BEE to? Is going into the creation of new businesses, using BEE as leverage to create new businesses. And as Langa mentioned, I mean, there are so many opportunities in infrastructure. You know, if you look at the US, the base of the US was off infrastructure, and that was where value creation started. You know, building those rail lines, you know, putting the trains there, the hospitals, all of it is a key component of economic growth. And the reason why this is actually particularly important is, I mean, when you look at South Africa, I don't want to start to bring, you know, a morbid discussion, but, you know, from 1990 to 2020, our average GDP growth is around 2.7%. 3% as an emerging market, we could do better. So how do we actually leverage things like Regulation 28 to actually assist in bringing more jobs into our country? You know, when you look at our unemployment rate, I won't even mention the numbers because it's shocking, but areas like this are very helpful in also ensuring that, you know, we create more jobs, sustainable jobs for that matter. So yeah, it's exciting.
Thank you. Dr. Theo, do you have any views on this aspect?
Yeah, Regulation 28 is a potentially exciting driver. You know, I think there's a lot of work to be done. Just changing the regulation isn't going to make it happen overnight. You know, pension funds simply don't have the skills or capacity on how to analyze the unlisted space appropriately. So there's work that has to be done there. We then need the supply side to respond. So we need good fund managers in private equity space to really build capacity to meet demand. And so it's going to take some time, but there really is good potential for a good source of capital to be directed towards particularly you know, the private equity portfolio businesses that can be built using that capital, and certainly that can advance BEE.
Thank you, Dr. Stuart. I want to bring in the commissioner at this point. I know she has some experience with the competition law as well, and all the panelists have kind of intimated the issue of oligopolies in the system, and the kind of economic structure we have that creates unemployment, the triple challenges, and economic growth even at the same time. We saw the commodity boom not so long ago, etc. So I just want to zoom in on this issue of the economic structure that we have. What kind of economic structure do we have, and why is it so concentrated in the way it is? You have a new industry, you're most definitely going to find 3, 4, 5 big players almost all the time, consistently so. And we are seeing now at the JSE, finance, you know, is one of the biggest industries, and the mining sector in terms of market cap. But the contribution to GDP, finance is the biggest. It's probably growing at 2% almost every quarter. But you know, mining is not as big in terms of its contribution to GDP. So what's happening with the structure of the economy, Commissioner, and also looking at from a competition perspective, how do we break these oligopolies in the system? How do we restructure the economy?
Thank you very much, Monde. I think first, I just want to just highlight that BBBEE, it's not about what you perceive it to be. It's about what the requirements are in the legislation. Unfortunately, with BBBEE, there is always that tendency to want to say what it should have been or what it could look like, as opposed to implementing what the regulations and the codes are saying should be implemented. So I just wanted to just make that clear. We all don't like the tax laws. We all don't like the VAT, you know, amounts that are set, the percentages, but it doesn't give us the right to say, I think the VAT should have been 10% and therefore I won't pay it because I want it to be at 10%. So I just want to make this very clear to say that is one thing that has taken us backwards as a country, because people are failing to respect the rules that have been set out for economic transformation. This has happened with the employment equity for over a number of years. I was sitting as the commissioner on the employment equity. Every year, I was actually demoralized every time we release the report that is telling us the same story. And I think that's what people want to see also with BBBEE. I think as the people that are on this platform, we need to then reflect to say, do we want this BBBEE legislation and policy to go the same way as those other ones that are deemed to be failure? And if it is a failure, are we setting it up for failing? Because if we're doing that, then we cannot really be proud of ourselves as South Africans. So I just wanted to say that. But then in terms of our economic structure, Monde, I think it is a fact. When government did a 10-year review, the first 10-year review, which was led by Joel Netshitenzhe, they did identify the binding constraints to our economy. And monopolies, cartels were a significant part of it. Our value chains are entrenched. The barriers to entry in many markets are high. And so now, if you are going to want the people, the majority of this country, who are marginalized, to actually penetrate those value chains, they're not going to pierce themselves. They need to be pierced through a forward-looking legislation. So just to distinguish between your competition law and a law like the BBBEE legislation. The competition law is a post type of a legislation which monitors behavior and deal with the behavior. However, the BBBEE legislation is a forward-looking type of an intervention which seeks to open up the markets for people to come in, not to wait when the market continues to be entrenched to then come back and want to penalize or want to. So it's a forward-looking legislation, which basically means that you need to complement your ex-ante type of regulation with your forward-looking type of intervention. There are certain things in the economy that will not be resolved by normal market conditions, competition, and all that. So you need regulation that then compels a change that is more forward-looking to achieve the desired outcome. So it is the fact that our markets are highly concentrated. Just looking at the private equity space, you look at the top companies there. Again, you still have the same situation with top five companies accounting for about 73% or 70% of the market there. So what you have, you've got complex monopolies, which even though they are not necessarily creating evidence for you to see that they are coordinating, but they actually are coordinating because the market is structured that way. And in that way, their continued coordination makes it difficult for Black entrepreneurs who are new to come in and be sustainable. It's one thing to facilitate entry for somebody, but if your continued behavior in the market is monopolistic, it's coordinated, you're going to take them out of that. And then we say they have failed. So it is important for us to, when we look at whatever economic transformation issue that we talk about, we need to be in a position to say, to what end are we doing this? So if, for instance, with the amendments to Regulation 28, I think they do present an opportunity, but I think we should not lose sight of what exactly are we wanting to do. What we are wanting to do is to create parity. Those who did not participate must participate, but also they must have that benefit. So at the moment, when we measure it, we mustn't measure it. It's not about moving A and B, this transaction, now we invest in that and all that, but we are not measuring whether it changes the lives of the ordinary people. It is immaterial for us because it still keeps us in the same space. And I've also just noted the comment around broadening the ownership. Let me just say also, just to reiterate, that BBBEE has not been about ownership from the onset. If you remember, the 7 elements that were being measured were not focused on ownership. It's just that we'll speak about ownership because Black people do not own the economy. So the fact that it's spoken about is just the emphasis, but it doesn't mean that all of the other elements are not important. We continue to say enterprise and supply development is actually one of the key elements that could have been enhanced significantly during the COVID-19 pandemic, because a whole lot of Black businesses, Black entrepreneurs needed that support. And so if we are really going to look at it holistically and not focus on ownership only, we're going to see the value of what BBBEE can make for this country. And if we focus and implement it in the correct way, we should be able to derive the benefit. In conclusion, I just want to say also that when we're speaking about BBBEE, we are not saying skills development is less important or more important. And as you are aware, there are priority elements, which is ownership, skills development, as well as enterprise and supply development. That gives an indication that as a country, we are serious about all of those priority elements. But then all of them, because it's a balanced scorecard, they're important because they pursue a particular agenda within the economy. So now, when you look at all of these things, what we have done is that instead of dealing robustly with why the economy is not transferring, or why are we not creating new businesses to expand the pie, to grow the pie, we then focus on wanting to change what ownership is, when ownership is about Black people. You can't change ownership about Black people and make it something else. So the BBBEE legislation is very clear. Ownership, if it's going to be Black, it must be linked to a natural Black person. You can never classify anything, any corporate structure, in whatever form. You cannot classify it as Black unless there is a Black person at the end of that corporate structure. That Black person who contributes that Blackness to your structure. So yes, there may be other ways that people want to structure transactions and so forth, but please do not pass them as Black if there's no Black person. And that Black person must be a natural human being, a human being that is alive, that meets the definition of Black people in the Act. So I just want us to then look at it from saying, we want to transfer the economy of this country. Are we going to be able to do that? Not with the perceptions that we have about BBBEE. So I'd rather encourage everybody to follow the rules as they are. When we don't like the rules, there are lobby groups like the BMF and all of those. We do go and change and advocate for the laws to be changed. But until the laws are changed, let's implement the laws as they're required so that we can achieve what was intended. So I just want to also conclude by saying, sorry, as another conclusion, sorry about that. But I just want to indicate that one of the things that Stuart mentioned is about the, what we are measuring, the JSE listed companies. Of course, they're not a true reflection of what we would like to see. But I think what I understand is that the measurement had to start somewhere. So in the BBBEE Act, the authority that we have is only to measure the JSE listed companies as well as the public entities and the organs of state. But what we've done as the commission is that we've expanded the pool in a sense that even the unlisted entities, we do measure their contribution. So our report will give you a picture inclusive of all of those that are not necessarily listed. But we need to increase the population of the entities that we measure. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Commissioner. We're also mindful of time, and I can see that we are running out of time. Unfortunately, we must have a hard stop at 7:30. So I think one of the most important questions I'm going to ask now, as kind of like a way forward, is the leadership question. The leadership question is probably the most important one, because leadership sets the tone from a government point of view, from a business point of view, and specifically in this context, from a SAVCA point of view and all its members. And what I would really like to get from the panelists' view, how do we collectively champion this thinking of BBBEE and lead this industry to view BBBEE and transformation in the correct manner? And what other kind of activities and programs can we do? Because we don't, like we said in the beginning, we don't want to just come and have a conversation and depart. We want to have an impactful conversation as far as we can, but how can we lead this very important, uncomfortable conversation forward? And hence the kind of panelists we have, and research is also a critical component. And Mr. Kabelo could not be here as well, also would have given a flavor of research as well. So really asking this critical question, how can we lead collectively moving forward together, and how can we keep each other accountable on a quarterly basis around BBBEE? And I'm sure you've seen that in the fourth quarter, starting last year, it's going to be an annual thing that the Association of BBBEE professionals has considered, I think, the month of September as BE month, and that started last year. So there are those kind of initiatives that are on board. But in this space, in the venture capital, private equity space, how can we champion BBBEE collectively as we are here moving into the future? I will start with Mametja, and we'll go to Langa, and we'll end with Dr. Stuart, and then we'll hand back to Kabelo Moja, but I think the commissioner should end as well before Kabelo comes in. Mametja.
Thank you, Monde. Certainly a very important question, and I think all of us as leaders need to ask ourselves this all the time. I mean, one of the things that I think, and I want to mention this because it's something, an initiative by SAVCA, is all of us consciously asking ourselves, how do we actually make an impact? I remember SAVCA at some point decided that we need more Black fund managers and going out and creating new Black fund managers. Why is that important? Because obviously those fund managers will also be investing in diversified portfolios, well, sorry, diversified areas and geographies. So, you know, if someone has certain exposure, the diversity of how they think also ensures that they actually do invest differently. But also it's important because it also creates the ownership that we're talking about. So I think number one is in our own spaces and in the associations, finding creative ways of one, leading and championing certain BBBEE aspects that move us forward as an economy. The second one is education, especially in private equity. I mean, the amount of time when you're talking to founder-owned and family-owned businesses and the lack of knowledge or the lack of appreciation of BBBEE. I liked what the commissioner mentioned, you know, this is like paying your taxes. It's something that you need to do. You cannot run away from actually having, you know, employees in your company that are Black, providing skills development and having the right ownership. And number three, I think we need to look at this as an opportunity as well. So there is the part of compliance, but it also always creates an opportunity. And I think in ensuring that we advocate the right message, but also come back and monitor. So I would actually say before we leave here today, maybe SAVCA should, you know, in the same way that we're monitoring the listed companies, could SAVCA through, you know, the member companies provide assistance in monitoring in the unlisted space, compliance to BEE? That's a question. Thanks, Monde.
Yeah, thank you very much for that question. I think speaking as a director of SAVCA, I think we do try to monitor and measure the extent to which our members, firstly themselves, are transforming. I think we also are always actively encouraging them to be aware of the legislation. I think, Madam Commissioner, you're very spot on that I think sometimes we get sidetracked by wanting to create our own little perfect paradise, and we deviate a little bit from the fact that it is legislation and not an encouragement. And I think actively as SAVCA, we're always trying to create platforms of learning, platforms of teaching, and platforms of advocacy around the issues of transformation. I think we're always actively looking to also participate not only just in the dialogues amongst ourselves, but the dialogues within the national platform. We are actively always wanting to see if we can engage with the commissioner to understand how we can better practice our trade within the ambits of the particular legislations. We are also actively trying to engage, for example, also with the Competition Commission to try and see how we dovetail in that space to also work towards creating a more equal society. I also think we actively play a role in the space by wanting to promote, and I can cite examples of specific private equity funds whose focus and whose impetus for existence is focused around addressing those issues of inequality, addressing those issues around transformation, addressing those issues around something that we may not have spoken about sufficiently today, which is the issue of diversity and inclusion, because our society is not just unequal on the basis of race, it's also unequal on the basis of gender, it's also unequal on the basis of age. And we are always actively looking to see how within the ambit of SAVCA, within the ambit of the industry, we can work towards championing those causes. I think if you have attended the conferences of the organization, if you have attended the seminars, we put as a focal point transformation. I can also speak, I hope Tanya, who's listening in, will not reprimand me after this session. But even at the board, it's one of the topical issues. And I think we took a directive to say transformation, regardless of where we think the country is, will continue to be a standing subcommittee of the board, because it is central and it is pivotal to the transformation, not only of the sector, but of the country. And I think, just by way of concluding, we continue to participate, as I said, in various forums, whether it be infrastructure essays, platforms, whether it be the SA Investment Conference, looking to see and hear how, from a thematic perspective, we are all working and trying to find direction. And I think collaborations that we also have with the BMF, collaborations that we also have with ABSIP, collaborations that we also have with entities like the Black Business Council that are champions of transformation, also underpin the significance that we view of transformation as an organization and as an industry, and our alignment with the national imperative to create an equal society where we are talking about equality, especially across economic and social lines.
Thank you, my brother. Dr. Stuart.
Thanks very much, Monde, and thanks for a great conversation. I think there is lots of opportunity for the private equity industry. The industry has many excellent investment professionals who really do understand how BEE can be an opportunity, who are very good at driving transformation agendas within companies. I was just reminded of research we did with SAVCA back in 2020 when we surveyed a sample of investee companies and assessing what had happened to their BEE performance pre and post investment. And it's quite interesting that there's a very clear shift of improving BEE outcomes in companies that receive private equity investment. And that's both because of the ownership credentials that a private equity firm can bring, but also because private equity firms bring knowledge on how to get companies to transform in a way that's positive for their overall business strategy and growth. So the private equity industry really does have an important role to play in driving BEE across the economy. And I think it's an opportunity that should be grasped. So I'll post that graph out of interest in the chat so that people can see that.
Thank you, Doc. Commissioner, your final thoughts before we hand over to our lovely host.
All right, no, thank you very much. I think and thank you again for the discussions. And I think I have, I've had a number of reflections that are very useful also for our mandate just to take forward. But I just want to say that over the period that we have been looking at it, we do believe that government has provided guidance and direction in terms of what needs to be done. And I think that, you know, as stakeholders, we need to coordinate better, to work together to be in a position to implement the legislation better. I do not think that anything that is good for this country will be achieved through confrontation, through a whole lot of resistance that is unnecessary. I think if we sit together, if we work together and assist each other to achieve what ought to be achieved, it will make it easy for everybody that needs to comply. And on our side, we do believe also that we need to be in a position to simplify these things. BBBEE creates a lot of flexibility for investors, both foreign and local investments. That is why you've got facilitation of ownership through private equities and so forth. So it is important to embrace the flexibility that is there, but to use it to the benefit of our economy and achieve what we ought to achieve. But in conclusion, really, I do think that we could also coordinate better also in terms of with other research institutes. I know Intellidex, for instance, does a whole lot of good research that complements what we can do as well as the regulator. I think we need to have our hearts in the right place so that we can achieve for the benefit of the ordinary South African. So often we do get to be sidetracked. So my appeal to everybody is really to say, can we please work together? Can we coordinate better? Can we ensure that the public and the private sector work for the benefit of South Africans? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you, fellow panel members. And of course, to our audience, thank you, industry members, BMF members, SAVCA members. It's been a very insightful journey and discussion, and I think we could go on for quite a lot longer. I do see there are questions in the chat room, but unfortunately we've run out of time. We're not going to be able to address them in this forum. Clearly a contentious subject. Thank you everyone for your time. I just want to highlight that CPD certificates will be issued to attendees via email together with the Commissioner's slides. I thank you all for your time. Have a pleasant evening. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.